Brulé. This is Steve Brulé, and it is coffee time. An informal session where we go over some of the things that have come across my desk over the last couple of days, which the last coffee session, I think, was Friday. Now, I'm not going to talk about coronavirus today, as I promised last Friday. Not a lot has changed, although there's never any shortage of lunacy to discuss. I want to draw your attention. First of all, it's good to see Michael Keller and the Print Master and some of the regulars in the stream here. Josue has joined us already in the comment stream. I want to draw your attention to my VIP club member card of the patriarchy, which authorizes me to comment on all the comings and goings of the evil global feminist empire, which there are many thousands upon thousands of well-funded organizations, feminist organizations around the world. So today we have, I guess the main event today is a new version of white guilt that's come out. I think it was in was it Slate, I think, or Vice? Vice.com pointed this one out. And they are calling climate guilt a result, or rather climate grief, a result of white people. And white people caused climate change. Therefore, white people are responsible once again for the failures or frustrations or anger of all other people on the planet Earth. What a surprise. This is something feminists have been hammering away at since they first began hammering away at men. It's always about blame, shame, and guilt of the terrible white man. So let's get straight into it. But first, there's a couple of shorties along the same kinds of line, but the main one we're going to deal with is this new climate grief. But these other ones are also another blame the white man feminist overreach crap, as you're quite familiar with hearing about here on Studio Brulé. So, reading this headline from the top, and again, the links are in the description of the video. Reading this headline, opioid-addicted doctor falsely accused her husband of rape after he found out she was having an affair and refused to speak up even when he was thrown in jail for a month. Now, as some of you know, I did I make the claim boldly, that marriage is a dead corpse that our culture is carrying around and it's stinking up the culture. Traditional marriage is what I'm talking about, and you know that. And that traditional marriage is all the legal stuff that is poured onto men's heads and shoulders as a result of going into marriage. And that makes men indentured servants, not partners of women. And the feminist movement has helped in that regard enormously by lobbying for and successfully passing legislation and public policy that makes life even more miserable for men, especially when they are married. Not the least of which the recent success that women have had in eliminating presumption of innocence for men. And this case is particularly egregious, as we shall soon see. This is published May 16th, only 2 days ago, in the Daily Mail, Australia. Australia, as most of you will know, is a horrible cesspit of feminist hatred, right through and through. I used to have a lot of Australian friends from my travels that I had met, and I stayed with an Australian fellow in Ireland with his girlfriend. Tremendous people. I have a lot of fun with my Australian friends when I've met and traveled with them. But sadly, the country has been taken over by a gang of abusive bigots known as feminists. Let's read this quote from the top. Her estranged husband believes she made the allegations fearing he would tell her medical colleagues about her addiction to tramadol. Police and prosecutors had pursued the charges despite being shown CCTV footage from the home, showing the sex was consensual, his lawyer claimed in court. Now, where have we seen this before? None other than in Great Britain, in London, where Mark Pearson was dragged through, I think it was 2 years of hell, destroying his life, destroying his reputation, for the claim that he assaulted an actress. I forget her name now, but you can find the information here on Studio Brulé. She claimed that in passing him by in a subway station, he managed to insert his fingers in her private parts in the space of a half a second when they passed each other going in different directions. They had CCTV footage proving this was not possible. I mean, you shouldn't even need CCTV footage to claim that to understand that this is not possible. But even with the footage, the police vigorously prosecuted this poor guy, destroying his life. And here's another example of it in Australia. 2 different countries overrun with feminist, hate-filled bigots, and these guys' lives are destroyed. It's not even the presumption of innocence here we're talking about that is lost. It is even with the proof of innocence that the police, who are now taking orders from their feminist overlords, the police are pursuing these guys right to the final bitter end, dragging them through a living hell, even when they can prove themselves innocent. This is outrageous, of course. Any thinking, living human being will know that this is absolutely outrageous. But then again, here I will remind you, I have my patriarchal cigar. Most of you have been hearing about this for some time. This patriarchal cigar, I've had to wrap it up in cellophane because this patriarchal cigar is to be lit when we see some sign of humanity amongst the feminist movement. And I'll tell you this, I think this cigar is going to outlive me, because a sign of humanity from feminism is pretty much impossible. You might as well expect fire and brimstone to be spitting out ice. Now, let's read on here. Let me expand this a little bit for you so you can read it better. Mr. Walsh said it was a stark example of a pattern of ideological bias in sexual assault cases by prosecutors. No kidding, that's an understatement of the century, I'd say. There seems to be a trend that anybody accused of sexual assault must be guilty. Where did that come from? Thank you, feminist idiots. Which completely overrides the presumption of innocence. Everywhere in the Western world, this is going on. And no more so than at the university campuses in the West, where there has been a destruction of men's lives on the mere accusation without foundation of their female friends, ex-friends, or intimate partners who suddenly decide that it's better for them to make a false accusation and destroy the man's life. Do you think that these feminists lost 1 minute of sleep over destroying a man's life? Not one. The feminist movement is as evil as it gets in the history of humanity. Let's read on here. These are a few of quotes from that particular article, and I do recommend that you read the entire article. Link is in the description. Reading from the top, these are ideologically driven. Didn't I just read this? Oh, no, I didn't. These are ideologically driven prosecutions, even in the absence of hard evidence, as in the case with Mark Pearson, as in the case of that fellow who unfortunately ran into Mattress Girl. There's many, many examples of this. It's like UVA, false rape alarm case that Rolling Stone reported on and was later determined to be absolutely, totally fabricated fiction. This is the situation that men are up against right throughout the West. Let's read this again. These are ideologically driven prosecutions, even in the absence of hard evidence, and it is a considerable concern. Again, understatement of the century. Look, presumption of innocence is one of the very few things that stands in the way of your life totally being destroyed by a charismatic con artist with something to gain or just to amuse themselves. People today are taking too much of their freedom for granted. Freedom isn't something that falls out of the sky or grows out of the ground. It is something we hard won. And the presumption of the innocence is one of the pillars that protects any of your freedoms. You lose the presumption of innocence, you lose any possibility of freedom. It's that simple. Freedom of speech is another one. But I will contend that presumption of innocence is the most important, and it is under attack every single day by the hate-filled feminist bigots whose hate movement has moved all the way around the world. Let's read on. He told the Supreme Court that the police and prosecutors ignored critical evidence and failed to test his estranged wife's allegations. Yeah, her word was considered law, even with video footage proving otherwise. Let's read another quote from that article. This includes stark CCTV footage showing the couple having consensual sex, the court heard. Despite this video evidence, he claimed prosecutors then laid even more charges at DC, including attempted anal and vaginal rape. The prosecutor later denied ever seeing the CCTV video. Now, look at folks. This is one of the wealthiest couples or wealthier couples in Australia. She's a doctor and he's a professional of some sort, which I can't remember if it's mentioned in the article or not, but he's an employed fellow making a good salary himself. They probably have a great, lovely home, and they can afford, obviously, a lot of CCTV video cameras within their home, probably outside of their home too. Imagine just how risky this is for the everyday guy over there who doesn't have the time, the energy, or the money to start protecting himself with 35 CCTV cameras covering every angle of his house, where his partner might decide to take advantage of him with a false accusation. This is why we need presumption of innocence. And we need to prosecute these prosecutors for not, or fire them at least, for being so incompetent or ideological or bigoted to pursue these kinds of prosecutions where there is proof of the guy's innocence. This should never even, charges never should have even been laid. But they weren't only laid, they were prosecuted. Because these prosecutor offices are taken over by feminists everywhere. That's how in Ontario in 2001, the prosecutor's office and the police departments throughout the province enacted a policy, and this policy is different than law, obviously. A law has to go through public hearings and legislation and blah, blah, blah. A public policy at a police station or a court doesn't have to. This is where these tyrant administrators, who are typically feminists, get their little fingers in there and try to destroy life for men as much as they can. In 2001 in Ontario and in many other jurisdictions throughout the West, they enacted a policy that in every call of domestic violence, a man must be arrested. Every single call, no leeway given to the officers, no judgment allowed. A call to the police on domestic violence must result in an arrest of the man every single time. So that tells you just how powerful the feminist movement has been. They've installed their bigots in every facet of our society, every area, from courts to the child protective services, to parliament, through education, everything. And they've worked themselves into administrative roles where they make these kinds of policies that destroy men's lives. And the charge alone is the punishment very often. And at the same time, The prosecutor's office enacted a policy of prosecuting every single charge for domestic violence, regardless of evidence or evidence to the man's innocence. This is how disgustingly bad and inhumane it has become in the entire Western world. And those people, I get frustrated when I hear some guys saying, and then you may have heard this too. I've heard this 1,000 times in my life. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. This is one of the stupidest, simple-minded, childish sayings ever invented by a human being. It completely ignores the fact that people, your enemies, or somebody who has something to gain from you, has a way to, can frame you, can manipulate the situation, can lie, all of the different ways in which people attack one another. You're not safe just because you have nothing to hide. They can create something out of thin air. And what's used to protect us is a presumption of innocence. But the stupidity of our culture that has grown in orders of magnitude fast over the last 20, 30 years has allowed people to accept the destruction of the presumption of innocence. This is ridiculous, has to be changed. Let's go on to another case. And this is a little bit of a different angle, a different topic here. And this shows how the media is so hungry to pretend that, or to prop up female accomplishments through history, and imply that the reason we don't talk about it more is because women are oppressed. Here, they're going through history and twisting things around every day and then printing them in the press itself. This printed on April 18th this year. Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, whoever can pronounce that, I don't know, you deserve a medal. The woman who found the New World 500 years before Columbus. Now let's reread that headline. Never mind the name. Just call her Gudrid. The woman who found the New World 500 years before Columbus. Look, you know something? Most of the people reading these or flipping through these headlines and Twitter tweets and Facebook posts about articles stop right there at the headline. They might read the subtitle, but maybe not. But let's read the subtitle. In our new series on lesser-known adventurers, we shine a light on the Icelandic explorer who reached America long before Chris. Okay, let's have something to say about that. Sorry about that short interruption, folks. But the headline, let's read it one more time. The woman who found the New World 500 years before Columbus. Anybody who reads English, even its rudimentary level as your 18th language, is going to read that and say, wow, this intrepid woman set out basically on her own and her own initiative and found the New World and beat Christopher Columbus by 500 years. This is terrible that we aren't taught that in history. What? Women are beating men at everything. And yet the only reason we don't is because there's a conspiracy to hide the fact amongst our public. That's what you're going to get out of it. The woman who found the New World 500 years before Columbus. Well, let's look at some of the details here. Here they conclude the intrepidness rating on the article, considering the era, the challenges, the risks, her gender, and the cultural norms of the time, Gudrid's a 10 out of 10. Yeah, I'm sure they're not twisting the truth here at all, are they? Or are they? Let's have a read at Wikipedia about this Gudrid. According to both sagas, Gudrid then married Thorstein Eriksson, that's her first husband, younger brother of Eric the Red's son. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, Gudrid then accompanied her husband on his quest to Vinland. Vinland was their word for the Americas. Basically, it's the east coast of Canada, Newfoundland, and that sort of area. But let's read the truer aspect of this. Gudrid then accompanied her husband on his quest to Vinland, with the hope that he could retrieve the body of his brother Thorvald. Well, there we go. She was a passenger on her husband's boat. Maybe she was making him sandwiches. But holy, you know what? That doesn't line up with the article, does it? Not at all. Not in the slightest bit. Gudrid then accompanied her husband. This is her first husband. Her husband who went to retrieve the body of his brother in Vinland. So in other words, if he's retrieving the body of his brother's already been to Vinland before our intrepid Gudrid. How could he go to retrieve the body of his brother? This is her husband, Thorstein. She's a passenger on her husband's boat. Her husband's going to retrieve the body of his brother, Thorvald. Therefore, his brother Thorvald is already there. I mean, neither one of them are the first to get to Vinland or the Americas. Not one of them, not even Gudrid's husband. Let's read on. After his death, this is her husband's death, Thorstein or whatever his name was, Gudrid moved back to Brattahlid, where she married a merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni, who is described in the Saga of Eric the Red as being a man of good family and good means and a merchant of good repute. Okay, terrific. So now, crap, I've forgotten her name again. Gudrid. Gudrid has a second husband. She'd already been out on a voyage to Vinland with her first husband, probably to make sandwiches for him. Now she's come back after he died. So this is going to be the third trip. Let's read from the top. According to the Saga of the Greenlanders, after their marriage, and at Gudrid's urging, maybe she liked Vinland, she wanted to go back. She urged him. Probably her husband didn't want to go back, but you know what nagging does to men. The two led an attempt to settle Vinland with 60 men, 5 women, and a cargo of various livestock. While it is implied that the Saga of Eric the Red that she accompanies him, Gudrid is never actually mentioned in the account of the journey. So let's pause here for a second. In the account of the journey at the time, the Saga of Eric the Red, Gudrid is not even mentioned. Gudrid is not even mentioned in the saga. That's how strong a role she played, the second version, in the second journey. Gudrid's role was so important that they didn't bother to mention her name in the write-up of the saga. Okay, maybe making sandwiches doesn't qualify for inclusion in a saga of that sort. Well, let's read on. While in Vinland, the couple had a son whom they named Snorri Thorfinnsson. Maybe he snores a lot, who knows, who is the first European reported to be born in the Western Hemisphere. So, folks, there we have it. Gudrid, a passenger whose role doesn't warrant putting her name in the actual account, now is being recast as the woman who found the New World 500 years before Columbus. Wow. Can feminists not lie about something? Does anybody have an example of anything written or coming out of the mouths by feminists that is not an abject, outright, distorted lie? Oh, Lord. There's just It's everywhere you look. You know, in a sense, the feminists make my job easy here, criticizing them on Studio Brulé. I can do it every day. I could do this 24 hours a day as long as I had somebody feeding me headlines, because you know what? When you dig into anything that feminists claim, it always, I have not seen a feminist claim come out to have any to be true. Now, they do use the Holmes guy there, Sir Doyle, his claim that nothing is more deceitful than an obvious fact. The only times feminists put a truth in their story is when they want to deceive, when they need that truth to deceive, when they want to use an obvious fact in order to deceive. Everything else, the thrust and conclusions of the stories of that feminists write, is always a lie, an outright lie, right down to the original claims of feminism, that men oppressed women throughout history. Now, feminists use the fact that men controlled the world they built for 2,000 years prior to the Industrial Revolution. Yes, they use the obvious fact that men predominantly controlled that world because men built it. Men built that world, and women didn't want control of it because it was deadly. Those men who had control were always, their lives were threatened. They were stabbed in the back. They didn't live long, and it wasn't an easy life being in control at those times. So everything we look at from feminism is a lie. They use that lie of men being in the positions of power to claim that women were oppressed, kept out of those positions of power, when in fact women were protected and provided for. So let's get on to the main event here. Here we have I think this is the article in Vice. Expand that up for you. Read the title with me. People of color experience climate grief more deeply than white people. Here, straight away, we know we're getting into the victim Olympics. There's no sense in beating around the bush. This is plain, straight out victim Olympics crap. Let's read the subtitle. We are not only disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, but we carry a pain that comes from a long history of racial terror. Nobody's going to argue that that slavery and racism was bad. But if we're going to have an honest conversation about slavery, we're going to have to talk about all slavery. And slavery has been everywhere in the world since the beginning of humanity. In fact, people who seriously study slavery, they talk in terms of levels or degrees of freedom, because there were many, many different levels and degrees of freedom throughout human history. Outright slavery was the worst of them. But there was indentured servitude. There was this being plain poor. But there was all kinds of forms of levels or different degrees of freedom throughout history. So white people were enslaved, black people were enslaved, Chinese people were enslaved. Slavery was everywhere in the world. And the bottom line fact is that the only time in history where slavery was rooted out, where it existed, by the people who were enforcing the slavery, is in the U.S., in the Americas, with the elimination of the emancipation of slaves. And everywhere else in the world, there was never a voluntary internal urge to eliminate their slavery. And slavery still goes on in many parts of the world today. But none of that is a concern to these lying, bigoted feminists, because, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle says, nothing is so deceiving as an obvious fact. Here, the obvious fact is that there was slavery in the U.S. It wasn't a good part of the U.S. history, but the lie is that was the only place in the world where slavery was actively defeated. the only example in history. And it's not, black people were not the only people enslaved, and white people were not the only slave owners. There were black slave owners throughout the world. There were Islamic slave owners, Chinese and Japanese slave owners. Slavery is equally distributed throughout history and throughout all peoples. So that's the lie that feminists perpetrate with the obvious fact that there was slavery in the US. Let's read on. Reading from the top. In an article for Vox, Cruz, Wiradjuri Gomeroy, and storyteller, told me, I couldn't possibly pronounce those names. We see and feel the spirit of our animals and our land. They are our ancestor spirits. We don't own country. Country owns us. We come from her to protect her. When country hurts, we hurt. When our animals, our spirit cousins cry, we cry. Well, this is really emotional claims. But here it is, folks. They are claiming that they are one with the land and that other people are not. Specifically, they're claiming that white people are not. I got news for you people. Every living thing on this planet Earth has an equal claim to being connected to every other living thing on this planet Earth. Being an Aboriginal or an Indian or any other race does not give you a greater claim to being connected to the land or the animals or the spirits of any kind. That is fatuous nonsense. That is self-aggrandizing nonsense. And to say you don't own country, well, if you don't own country, why are you looking for more ownership of land and country? Country owns us. We come from her to protect her. I'm sorry, but that is just sentimental nonsense, intended to elevate their status and intended to imply to other people not of that group to feel like they are less connected. And I'll tell you this, you are not one iota less connected to the spirit of the land, the animals, or the earth than they are. In fact, by putting this thought and pushing this idea forward, they are demonstrating that they are, in fact, less aware of the connections between life than you and I are. Because if you look at this logically, rationally, and with sympathy and compassion, you will realize that there is no one ever born on this planet Earth who is any less connected to the animals and the land and the spirits of whatever than you are. We are all exactly equal in that. We all come from the earth, and when we die, we're going back to the earth, and there's nothing you can do about it. Claiming that you are more connected to others is a reach for power. It's ego. It is, in fact, an immoral act. So take that what you will. Let's go reading from the top here. What Cruz was describing was climate grief, a psychological phenomenon that affects Black and Indigenous people and other people of color in uniquely devastating ways. Nonsense. That's vanity and victims Olympics, nothing more. And that's what they see every time they see a chance to call themselves victims. They don't go and they're not these people, I'm not talking about all Black and Indigenous people. I'm talking about these feminist idiots who are perpetrating or propagating this kind of philosophical hogwash. Let's read on here. Just as we are seeing with the COVID-19 outbreak, environmental racism, more victim Olympics, forces people of color, especially Black and Indigenous people, to bear the brunt of global disaster. More absolute nonsense. The fact is that people who are most affected by the COVID-19 outbreak, first of all, are the old and the sick, and second of all, the poor, especially who are old and sick. And it has nothing to do with your Blackness or your Indigenousness or whatever race you are. If you're a poor white person living in crowded circumstances, you are also more affected. I've got no patience for this idiocy. Let's read on. People of color know society is going to make sure we're impacted first and impacted the hardest. Now, have you ever read a bunch of nonsense any worse than that? Society, this vague idea, this boogeyman out there is out there making sure you're impacted first. You're paranoid. This is a victim mentality disorder. And we're going to go into that a little bit before we're done here today. But these people, folks, these people are working, they're being paid with your tax dollars. The people she's talking about there are psychologists who we know are infiltrated by feminists fully. They're paid for by your tax dollars. They're paid well. They're professors. They're thinking up this nonsense. Let's read from the top. For Black and Indigenous peoples, you could argue that the history of our oppression is the story of the Anthropocene itself. We'll get into that in a minute. The current geological age defined by the dominant influence that human activity has had on mass extinction, climate, and the environment. Well, they're editorializing that a little bit, obviously, because feminists cannot say anything without lying. It is about human activity, but it's not centrally about mass extinction, climate, and environment. It's about human activity and the impact of human activity on the environment. Let's read on here. This quote by Sowell applies in spades here. And those of you who know Thomas Sowell, I think it is, he's a Black man in Texas, an intellectual, a true intellectual, not one of these fake intellectuals that we're suffering from in the universities today. And he's a Black man. Let's read what he has to say. There are few modest talents so richly rewarded, especially in politics and the media, as the ability to portray parasites as victims and portray demands for preferential treatment as struggles for equal rights. Yep. They're trying to portray Black people and Indigenous or Aboriginal peoples as victims. And they're always wriggling around for extra rights on this. I have met a lot of Black people who have been very successful in life and coming from poor backgrounds. This nonsense that they're portraying here is just an excuse because they refuse to get off their butts and fix their own damn lives. That's the hard truth of it. There is nothing stopping them in the US and in Canada, in the Western world, from fixing their own lives in every way they want. But they're too lazy, they're socialist, communist, and they want the government to give them everything, and they're going to play victim until they get everything they want. Let's read on. This is what the Anthropocene epoch is about. Some scientists, this has not been broadly agreed upon at this point, but it is a legitimate identification of era of the epoch of the Earth because the human influence on the planet is so significant that it is going to lay down layers in the geological strata to identify this time period. Experts say, let's read we'll read the top here. Scientists declare dawn of human-influenced age. Yep, it's safe to say that humanity is so prolific, so successful, and so busy and active that we are changing the face of the planet to a significant degree. I'm going to pause right here to recognize Xeranx for his generous donation to Studio Brulé. Very much appreciate all of the support we can get here at Studio Brulé. Xeranx says, it's been said that C19 has a greater effect on those with a vitamin D deficiency. My doctor has me on high vitamin D intake because people of color don't get enough sun exposure in temperate climates. Wokeists won't care. That's interesting. Very interesting. Should I be getting vitamin D? I do get a significant amount of sun here, but maybe somebody out there can enlighten us on how widespread and where the evidence is for this. Love to hear it. The subtitle here, experts say human impact on the Earth so profound that Holocene must give way to epoch defined by nuclear tests, plastic pollution, and domesticated chicken. And the reason they say that is that there's so much of this stuff that it's laying a layer down that archaeologists of the future would identify distinctly different from previous epochs. So that's where that's coming from. And we missed a date on that there. That was this article goes back to 2016. And I think it started in the 1950s or so, where they're identifying this beginning of the Anthropocene epoch. But let's read from the top again. The evidence of humanity's impact on the planet is overwhelming, but the changes are very recent in geological terms. Where an epoch usually spans tens of millions of years, one criticism of the Anthropocene as geology is that it is very short, said Zalasaiewicz. Our response is that many of the changes are irreversible. That is true. I'm not a geologist, I mean, I don't know what are the criteria for them making these decisions. But one thing is indisputable. Humanity has crashed suddenly into the scene in geological timescales over the last couple of hundred years and changed the surface of the Earth significantly. Enough, in my opinion, that it is distinguish itself from other periods of Earth history. Let's read from the top. The 35 scientists on the WGA, that's the World Geological Association, who voted 30-3 in favor of formally designating the Anthropocene with 2 abstentions, will now spend the next 2 to 3 years determining which signals are the strongest and sharpest. Crucially, they must also decide a location which will define the start of the Anthropocene. Geological divisions are not defined by dates, but by a specific boundary between layers of rock, or in the case of the Holocene, a boundary between 2 ice layers in a core taken from Greenland and now stored in Denmark. So that's how they determine beginnings and ends of epochs on the planet Earth. Let's read again from the top. I find this quite interesting, and I'm quite supportive of the fact of identifying this Anthropocene era. It seems to make a lot of sense. The Earth is not going to be the same after our human explosion of control and influence upon the planet. Reading from the top. Research has bolstered the idea that white supremacy, this is from the original article, okay? Now we're back to the craziness of the feminists claiming that Black and Indigenous people suffer from climate grief more than white people. And you're going to see that they don't stop just at the suffering. They're going to claim it's directly a result of white people's behavior. Again, demonizing white people, as they have since feminism began. Reading from the top. Research has bolstered the idea that white supremacy has led to the climate crisis. Scientists from University College London found that the mass genocide that accompanied the colonization of the Americas in the 15th century permanently altered Earth's climate due to a huge swath of abandoned agricultural land that pulled down enough carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to eventually chill the planet. Again, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Nothing so deceitful as an obvious fact. There may be some, but also notice that they're talking about chilling the planet here in this paragraph. Reread this at the top. The idea that white supremacy has led to the climate crisis. And they're going back to the 15th century to claim that there was white supremacy at that time. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Reading from the top. Worldwide, the memory of indescribable racial terror informs the climate grief of our people. Wow. Wow. Where do they come up with this abject nonsense? The memory worldwide, folks, worldwide. The memory of indescribable racial terror informs the climate grief of our people. What nonsense. Let me put it to you this way. My family, my ancestors, recent ancestors, grandparents, and my father and mother grew up in the Depression. How many of you guys, you're out there, your audience members, your grandparents, possibly your parents, grew up in the Depression? And prior to the Depression, poverty was the norm, extreme poverty, starvation was common. Does anybody alive today remember that? Do you have memories of your grandparents' experience? Do you remember what your grandparents went through? You weren't even alive then. These idiotic morons are claiming that they have a memory of indescribable racial terror. This person who wrote this is probably no more than 30, 35 years old. She has zero memory of that. Her entire memory is of abject total privilege, having everything she wants when she wants it, and more, having everybody kowtow to her every claim of victimization. She's a spoiled princess. Those are the only memories she has. But she gets her power by claiming this kind of idiocy and this kind of victim status. Oh, I have memory of indescribable racial terror. No, you don't, you lying idiot. And it doesn't inform anything about climate grief of your people. This is the kind of stupidity that is passing as intellectualism today. This is exactly why we have to clean the universities right out of the stupidity of feminism. Let's read on. Our grief can help us stay motivated to do this work. Mary Hegler, a Black climate justice essayist and writer in residence at Columbia University, says that climate rage is a normal response to these injustices and continued violence. They're looking for excuses to ramp up the accusations, to ramp up their hatred, their racism of blaming white people. They're claiming that they experienced the terrors of racism themselves today. I mean, this is clearly mental illness. The whole lot of you are mental ill and you should have no place in a university system. Hegler, reading from the top, whose work is rooted in her experience as a Black person from the American South, said her anger has been a really powerful outlet to keep me from cycling back into depression and shock. But I still go back there sometimes. I have nightmares a lot. Well, you know what? That's the root of the problem. That right there is the root of the problem. We have somebody here who is prone to depression and rage, perhaps is bipolar, who knows? She's kind of claiming that she's bipolar. She shoots from anger to depression and back and forth. And she's looking for an excuse for this. She's looking for it to be legitimized. She is looking for an excuse to indulge in this bipolar behavior, and she's dreamt up climate grief and that white supremacists are the source of our climate problems. And of course, the source of her climate grief, which is causing her, quote, causing her to cycle into depression and shock, back to anger again. This is classic example of creating an enemy to suit your own pre-existing bigotry. Let's read from the top. For some of us, we find ways to handle grief by building community through engagement with spiritual practices. Christy Kenko, PhD, a climate scientist and co-founder and executive director of Boulder Eco Dharma Sangha, whatever that is, specializes in climate grief, particularly among women of color. I'm not the slightest bit surprised. Feminist organizations have a talent for whipping up funding from government by creating guilt on nonsense basis. And here we have somebody here who has an entire organization dedicated to climate grief among women of color. How much of our tax dollars are going into that nonsense, only to create more angry, racist, bigoted people amongst their community looking to blame white people for every one of their problems and never getting around to building a better life for themselves, unless it is by attacking other people. This sums it up. This image, okay, have a good look out there, you people, climate grief people who are, what do we call it? We're going to have to call it grief porn. Victim porn. This is who you are. Get off your high horse and just build your life. Make yourself a better life. Lots of people have done it before you. Your excuse is that you're too stuck on being a victim. Let's read on here. Kriti, I can't remember who that one is, experiences climate grief all the time, she said. I cry. I've done enough grief work that I'm not afraid of my own tears or those of anyone else. It's like bathing. Just as I bathe my body, I have to bathe my heart with my own tears. Yep, it's grief porn, folks. Grief porn. These people are addicted to feeling like they're a victim and crying in self-pity. And they're even admitting it, but they don't see it. They won't see it because there's far too much power to be had by claiming that it's all the fault of the evil white men. They are trying to create a fall guy for everything. And this is why hatred of white people is spreading around the world. Let's look at what this really is about. The modern professional mourning. In the eyes of the average modern professional mourner, they are performers. A common ritual in China involves a family paying the mourner in advance and bringing them in lavish style to the place the funeral will take place. So there's a long history of this fake crying. And here in Psychology Today is what is a professional mourner. It's an ancient tradition, and some people are naturally born to that role. Let's read what it says. They are known as mourologists, sobbers, wailers, or criers. In South Africa, you can pay someone to cry and threaten to jump into the grave if you are so inclined. Of course, they charge you more for that. And it's the same with these people. They're brought in to whip up the emotions of their own communities, the Black community or the Indigenous people, the Indigenous community, and they go in there and in the words, the very words of one of their leaders here, she says, I cry. I've done enough grief work, and I'm not afraid of my own tears or those of anyone else. It's like bathing. Just as I bathe my body, I have to bathe my heart with my own tears. Climate grief. That's what it's about. Professional mourners whose emotional excesses are there to whip up energy and anger and support against the evil white man. That's their purpose and their goal. And here as we continue on in that article. And this really says a lot as well. At the top, hope is such a white concept. Imagine that. There are white concepts now. Apparently, if you're a white person, you have different concepts than if you're a black person or a Chinese person or Japanese or whatever. Hegler says that too often the white-led climate community leans on the idea of hope, which can lead to inaction. Oh, is that so? Is that so? Your grief porn is what's leading to inaction. Your only action is getting angry and attacking people who are perfectly innocent, instead of fixing your own lives. Incredible that this even makes it into print. But even more incredible is that these people are paid by tax dollars to attack the very people who are paying them with their tax dollars. Let's read from the top. Hope is such a white concept, Hegler said. You're supposed to have the courage first, then you have the action, then you have the hope. But white people put hope at the front. Their insistence on hope for all of these years has led exactly where? Nowhere. No. If you want to look at the history of white people, look at everything you see around you that is built and at your disposal to make your life better. White men, to be exact, not to suggest that there weren't there weren't also other races of people contributing to this. But an awful lot of what we see around us is the very people who had the hope for a better future that you are living this day. Their hope and work for a better future is what you are enjoying and using the technology to write your hate-filled message of ignorance in complaint of the very people who provided you with all of this stuff. You're a disgrace to humanity. Let's read from the top. There's a certain loneliness that comes with being a climate person. Here, oh man, the victimology is just pouring out. Can you imagine? Poor me. Poor me, poor me, poor me. This article, you can replace every sentence in this article with that. Poor me, give me more free stuff. Poor me, give me more free stuff. Nasty white people, poor me, give me more free stuff. That's what this article comes down to. There's a certain loneliness that comes with being a climate person, Hegler said. Then there's an extra layer of loneliness that comes with being a climate person of color. Oh my God, the Victim Olympics is so incredible, isn't it? So incredible. Because you're just stuck in this perpetual position of trying to save white people from themselves, and it's so effing exhausting. Oh my God, I can't even imagine the kind of person who can write such tripe and then have the complete lack of awareness to put it in public and put your name to it. Let's reread it again. It's such ignorance, stupidity, and hatred and self-pitying nonsense. Read me this. Let's read it again. Not only is there a loneliness coming from a climate person, but let's read that next part. Then there's an extra layer of loneliness that comes with being a climate person of color, because you're just stuck in this perpetual position of trying to save those hopeless white people who invented and built everything you're using from themselves. Oh, isn't that sweet of her? After hating on white people throughout the article, she claims that she's in this perpetual position of trying to save white people from themselves. Imagine this ignorant idiot hating on white people and claiming to be saving them. Where have we heard that before? Where, indeed, have we heard that before? And the poor dear, it's so effing exhausting for her, trying to be the savior of the entire world. This is nauseating, I have to say. One of the most nauseating articles I've read in quite some time. And as Christy said, we are part of a river of grief, and we are never alone. Yeah. Us, victims of everything, saviors of everyone, are part of an everlasting river of grief. Poor me. Professional crier, emotional manipulator of people who are going to go out there and uh, engage in violence against white people because you've now identified them as the white supremacists who have caused all the problems of the world, going back to the 15th century. You're such an idiot. There aren't words, author of this article. There just aren't words for this level of idiocy. Now let's look at what victim mentality disorder is. And this from Healthline, the link's in the description. How to identify and deal with a victim mentality. We're just going to look at, see, I didn't put it on the screen for you here. Here we go. Read this headline with me here. How to identify and deal with a victim mentality. And this is from this PhD fellow, Timothy, medical doctor, I presume. I don't know for sure. Link is in the description. And we're not going to talk about how to deal with them because I don't want to deal with them, to be honest. You need to be a professional with being paid to deal with this nonsense because my view, they're intractably sick. They can't be helped. They want to be grief-stricken. They want to cry. They want to be victims. And they want that. They want to continue that. They're not the slightest bit interested in mental health because that would imply they have to take responsibility and control of their own lives, and that doesn't interest them. So I'm not interested in dealing with, in going over how to deal with a victim mentality disorder. They can go deal with themselves. But we do need to know how to identify these idiots. Let's read this from the top. The victim mentality rests on 3 key beliefs. Bad things happen and will keep happening. Other people or circumstances are to blame. Any efforts to create change will fail and there's no point in trying. Unless, of course, you're getting your money from claiming to want to save poor white people from themselves. That's just another victim stance, of course. This might involve placing blame elsewhere. Do we ever see that in spades? Making excuses, again. Not taking responsibility. Reacting to most of life's hurdles with "it's not my fault." Well, I don't think I could dream up a better example of all of this out of thin air than we saw in that one article. Here we have it. Placing the blame elsewhere, making excuses, not taking responsibility, and reacting to most hurdles in life with "it's not my fault." And no, I don't think you can cure these people. This is an endless pit of lost energy. Any energy you put towards that is lost energy, and you will just be dragged in to their pit of idiocy. So don't try to rescue these people. Reading from the top. Feeling victimized can contribute to beliefs such as "everything bad happens to me, and I can't do anything about it, so I try." And people with this mindset might feel frustrated and angry with a world that seems against them. In this case, they are calling it the white people. The world that they see against them is the white people. And the white people caused the climate crisis and white supremacy. Hopeless about their circumstances never changing. They don't want their circumstance to change. That's what they're not really quite mentioning in this article, is that in fact, these people don't want their circumstances to change. They get off in feeling sorry for themselves, in crying and calling themselves a victim and seeking sympathy and support as a result of it. It is a hopeless stance. We can only identify them and keep them out of our lives, and that's our goal there. And with that, folks, that's all I have for today. I want to thank you for joining me again on Studio Brulé. And look for me again later this week, or tomorrow. We'll be on tomorrow. I'm not sure what the topic is quite yet. And later this week, we're going to have both Janice Fiamengo on one session. We're going to be discussing academia and a new Fiamengo file. And I'm also going to have Wally Oho on. And if you want to have a look at who Wally is, there's a video posted this morning, quickly put up by Wally. I filmed here in the apartment. So look for a couple of exciting new videos this week and exciting more coffee break sessions. So as I like to remind folks, don't forget to do something you love every single day. Doesn't matter how busy you are, doesn't matter how bad things are. In fact, the worse things are in your life, the more important it is that you do something you love every single day. And if you don't have something you love to do, find something you love to do and do it. That is the best way to keep yourself positive mentally, and you never know, it might turn into a full-time profession for you. So with that, I hope you can join me again tomorrow for another session, coffee break session with Steve Brulé on Studio Brulé. Ciao.